a debtor. His insatiable desire for the tangible, for physical proof of his own monumental existence, became the very instrument of his professional demise. It was a fundamentally broken path, paved with box office receipts and leading directly to the abyss. This wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a spiritual bankruptcy, a public inventory of a scarred destiny where the glitter of fame had irrevocably turned to dust. The world watched the tightrope walker fall, and the ground was much further down than anyone imagined. The inventory of sins reads like a madman's shopping list, a testament to a hunger that could not be sated. A 70-million-year-old dinosaur skull won in a primal bidding war against Leonardo DiCaprio. A collection of shrunken pygmy heads staring from a shelf with hollow eyes. Two albino king cobras, Moby and Sheba, kept for protection or perhaps as a reflection of the venom in the Hollywood ecosystem. This wasn't collecting. It was a desperate land grab for reality itself, an attempt to own pieces of the world so the world couldn't own him. Each purchase was another nail hammered into the lid of his financial coffin, a fatal mistake disguised as an eccentric hobby. He called his acting method nuvo-shamanic, a spiritual quest for truth through performance. But the real performance was off-screen, a frantic, decades-long act of spending to fill a void that no dinosaur bone or Gothic fortress could ever plug. He bought islands as if they were souvenirs. He acquired a fleet of Rolls-Royces and a Lamborghini once owned by the Shah of Iran, its engine a roar against the encroaching silence of his own soul. The money smelled of fresh film stock and old fear. The fear of being Nicolas Coppola again, just another branch on a famous family tree, forever in the shadow of his uncle's legacy. He was buying his own legend, one absurd artifact at a time. Pause. And the price was everything. The wreckage of his empire was not just in foreclosed homes, but in the dozens of direct-to-video films he was forced to make. The meat grinder of fame had spat him out into a different kind of hell. Not poverty, but the purgatory of irrelevance. The verdict of financial ruin was not delivered in a courtroom. It arrived as a profound silence. The phones that once rang with offers from Spielberg and Lynch went dead, replaced by the insistent metallic tone of collection agencies. This was the anatomy of exile. Hollywood, a city built on the illusion of permanence, has a short memory for kings without kingdoms. Кейдж's talent, once a rare currency, was now just collateral against mounting debt. He entered the meat grinder of fame in reverse, a relentless churn of direct-to-video productions, each one a nail in the coffin of his A-list prestige. His nouveau-shamanic method, once the mark of a fearless artist, now looked like the desperate convulsions of a man being publicly electrocuted for cash. He wasn't just paying back the IRS, he was paying a penance. The price of survival was a public autopsy of his own career, one forgettable thriller at a time. The man who owned haunted mansions and Bavarian castles now slept in trailers on dusty backlots. The isolation was a physical presence, cold and heavy, like wet concrete. A king ruling an empire of cheap celluloid and regret. And the final tally for this decade-long purgatory? Pause. A sentence of 46 films. A scarred destiny, bought and paid for in the bargain bin. A monument to his own magnificent solitude. The final verdict is in. You can escape the taxmen, but you can't outrun the shadow of your own bunker. The glitter was just dust after all. The inventory of sins was long, but the theft of Action Comics #1 was a uniquely personal wound. It was not about the money, not initially. It was a violation of the sanctum. A piece of mythology, the very genesis of Superman, ripped from the collection of a man who had renamed himself after a comic book hero to escape a dynasty's shadow. The irony was a blade twisting in the gut. For years, the comic was a ghost, a phantom limb in his sprawling, chaotic estate, an empty space on a shelf that screamed louder than any creditor. The investigation went cold, buried under the weight of more immediate collapses. The comic was presumed lost to the underworld, another casualty in the anatomy of his fall. Then, a decade later, a whisper, a storage locker in the San Fernando Valley, a detective posing as a buyer. The scene played out like a B-movie script he himself might have starred in during his Hollywood exile. The recovery was not a moment of triumph. It was an archaeological dig into his own recent past. The artifact was returned, but the museum it belonged to was already in ruins. In 2026, that same recovered paper and ink, now carrying the patina of a true crime story, sold for $15 million, a sum that could have once staunched the bleeding. But now it was just a number, a postscript to a chapter already closed. The comic book returned home, but the home was no longer there. The comeback, when it came, was not a return to the throne. It was an encore in the shadows. His casting as Spider-Man Noir was a verdict in itself. He was to play an older, broken version of a 1930s hero, a man out of time, haunted by his past. It was not a performance. It was a public confession broadcast on the world's largest streaming service. The man who owned castles was now playing a hero who lived in a grimy, rain-slicked city. The universe had delivered its punchline. The new films were not blockbuster events. They were dispatches from the frontier, the work of a craftsman, not a king. The meat grinder of fame had been replaced by the quiet hum of the assembly line. He was still making product, but the packaging was different. Less gloss, more grit. The Berlinale's 4K restoration of Leaving Las Vegas served as a pristine, high-definition ghost, a reminder of the Oscar, of the critical acclaim, of a time when his self-destruction was hailed as art. Now it was a museum piece, a perfectly preserved fossil of his former glory. His legacy was becoming clear. It was not the box office receipts or the bizarre purchases. It was the sheer brutal persistence, the refusal to disappear. His true final monument was not made of film, but of stone. A 9-foot pyramid in a New Orleans cemetery, waiting patiently. Pause, a tomb built for a pharaoh who had already lost his empire. The year is 2026. The phone rings in the quiet of a life rebuilt on the rubble of an empire. It's no longer the call that promises a kingdom, the one that smells of fresh box office receipts and the intoxicating perfume of limitless credit. This call smells of ozone, old paper, and a calculated corporate risk. The caller is Amazon, a digital titan building a new pantheon from shadows and forgotten heroes. They need a centerpiece for their noir universe, a man who not only understands the dark, but has paid rent there. Nicolas Cage. The project is a live-action series, Spider-Man Noir. This is not the vibrant, primary-colored hero of the masses, the symbol of youthful optimism. This is a relic from the 1930s, a ghost haunting the alleyways of the Great Depression, a private eye in a world of concrete and corruption, a hero whose greatest power is his profound tolerance for pain and disillusionment. The character description reads less like a casting call and more like a page from Кейдж's own sealed dossier, a post-mortem audit of his public fall. An older, grizzled, a down-on-his-luck version of the superhero. It's not a role. It's a documentary with a mask. The industry sees it as a clever piece of casting. Кейдж sees it as the final, logical step of his life's work. The years spent in the direct-to-video meat grinder, a brutal chronicle of debt and desperation, the public auctions of his soul, where dinosaur skulls and comic books were liquidated like pieces of a shattered identity. The financial ruin that felt like a slow public execution broadcast in the pages of tabloids. It was all just research. An unsanctioned, life-altering, multi-decade session of his nouveau-shamanic method. He didn't need to pull a tooth for this role. The IRS had already extracted his financial spine. He didn't need to eat a cockroach. He had swallowed his own pride for years, one low-budget script at a time. Hollywood loves a comeback story, but this is not one. This is an anatomy of acceptance, a bitter testament. Кейдж is not climbing back to the A-list summit where the air is thin and the falls are fatal. He is finding his rightful, permanent place in the ecosystem's shaded undergrowth. He is the character actor as Survivor, the fallen king who learned to rule a smaller, darker kingdom. The man who once bought castles and shrunken heads is now selling his own authentic decay, and the price is better than ever. The performance is no longer about transformation. It's about revelation. He is simply showing the world the man who was left after the creditors, the tax agents, and the profound loneliness were done with him. The role is a verdict, a public acknowledgement that the glitter was an illusion, but the grit is terrifyingly real. He had already voiced the character in an animated feature, a brief, successful flirtation with this shadow self. Now it is a full-blown consummation. The contract is signed. The costume, a simple trench coat and a fedora, feels less like a disguise and more like a second skin he earned through years of public flagellation. He is to become the face of a forgotten era, a hero for an age of pervasive anxiety. The irony is thick enough to choke on, a flavor he has come to know well. The man who lost an empire of tangible things is now being paid handsomely to embody the very spirit of the Great Depression. The audience will watch, not to see him pretend, but to see him confess, to witness the scars he can no longer hide, now lit for dramatic effect. In the end, Nicolas Cage didn't find salvation in the spotlight's return. He found a role that paid him to be exactly what he had become, a ghost, haunting the beautiful wreckage of his own life.